founder of the Goheadhunt recruitment platform. Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by the man known as the father of the Queensland tourism industry. I'm not sure if you're aware, but your name has been searched on Google more than 2,000 times in just the last year. Thank you very much for joining us, Daniel.
Thank you, my pleasure.
Obviously, the tourism industry has been one of the most, if not the most, negatively impacted by the COVID. And when the news started to spread, when Scott Morrison came out first time saying, there's this virus and it started closing the borders with China, how did you perceive the information and what was your thoughts at the time?
Well, at the time, at the beginning, of course, none of us could have imagined how bad it would get. And we were all probably thinking the initial response from the Australian government was something of an overreaction, and the border closure was, of course, a grave concern to an industry that relies on people crossing borders all the time. So we were not particularly impressed when the borders closed. We knew it was a challenge, of course, the health situation, but we did not anticipate, as did anybody else, that it would get as bad as it did. And it certainly obviously escalated very quickly, and we very quickly found our industry in an enormous amount of trouble, because without people's movement, our industry simply stops. I used to pride myself showing a graph to people from outside the industry, showing how steadily the industry globally had grown over decades, and no crisis had ever really thrown us off the trend of growing. And of course, I was proven wrong, like many others, that the industry could fall off the cliff, and it did.
As restrictions lifted, how do you see the industry today? And what do you see the challenges for the next 3 years?
Well, in Queensland, in retrospect, we were quite fortunate that, of course, the restrictions internally, the restrictions on movement within Queensland were never as drastic as they were in other parts of Australia, or also other parts of the world. So as a consequence, some operators in Queensland, tourism operators, were able to sustain their businesses reasonably well, especially those businesses relatively close to major population centres. The international market, of course, completely collapsed. There was zero arrivals. And for many businesses, that took away the capacity to really sustain the businesses, because the spending of international visitors is quite different. They spend more on tours, on attractions, reef trips, for instance, and all those businesses relying heavily on the international market, they suffered and they still suffer. So it was pretty drastic for them. The domestic market has come back very strongly now that certainly most restrictions on movement and capacity constraints have been lifted. The domestic market in Queensland, and to some extent, a lesser extent in Australia, has come back very strongly. So we now find that the domestic numbers, the domestic spend in Queensland has actually reached levels pre-COVID, and in some cases is exceeding that. And that's obviously very satisfying. It's not completely compensating for the losses still ongoing in the international market.
Right. So what are the challenges you foresee in the next 3 years?
Well, from the demand side, it's clearly to accelerate and put the capacity back for international tourism. And when I say capacity, I'm thinking specifically of the aviation market.
Right.
Airlines are struggling to put the capacity back in the air, as it were, to reactivate those aircrafts that have been mothballed during COVID. Takes a lot of time, a lot of capital, and importantly, a lot of personnel. So all these factors contribute to a constraint in international access to Australia still, and that will be an ongoing problem, and various estimates suggest it will take at least 1 or 2 years until we have the international capacity back. So that's the first problem in the international market.
Right.
Across both domestic and international markets, we have the challenge, and it's very well documented, and that's partly why we're here, I suspect. The workforce challenges that our industry is facing, along with the broader economy, are very significant. So we have both labour and skill shortages, and no obvious solution that will fix all the problems.
What is the driving force behind the imbalance of the employer demand and the candidate supply now?
Well, I think there's many factors at play here. We have, of course, the repercussions of COVID itself when Australia closed its borders and as a consequence lost the normal migrant inflow and also temporary visa holders, the working holiday makers, the international students who both fill significant numbers of jobs in our industry, tourism and hospitality normally. And between those two alone, we would have lost hundreds of thousands of available workers, at least part-time workers, and that is a lingering issue because bringing those people back is taking some time. For tourism specifically, hospitality specifically, is a cohort of people perhaps who exited the industry because COVID appeared to suggest that tourism and hospitality was unreliable work. So those people who either lost their job or were at risk of losing their job in an industry that was suffering may have entered other industries and may be reluctant to come back. So I think it'll take a bit of time to fully analyze what the dynamics were, but certainly we have numerous issues that constrain the supply of labour for the economy and the supply of labour for tourism and hospitality specifically. Meanwhile, of course, as I said before, the domestic tourism market has accelerated, the demand is there.
What is the role of employers, education organizations, industry bodies, and the government that has to play to overcome those challenges? What would you say?
Well, I think working together and collaborating is the first really important ingredient. And as you identified, there's the employers, the individual employers. There are the trainers and the training providers and the government setting the framework and the rules and occasionally also subsidizing and supporting those initiatives. So all of those parties working together with the employees. We have an industry that is made up of small to medium-sized businesses in many cases, thousands of them in Queensland alone. And it is challenging, but inevitable that the individual employers have to see the bigger pictures. They may have an employee with them for a certain amount of time, and they have to accept that that employee may move as part of their career development. That's okay. Having short-term employees shouldn't deter us from investing in our staff and treating them really as a long-term investment. But human capital is the one thing where we as an industry can make a difference to the product that we offer. Destinations around the world have physical attributes, beaches and forests and the infrastructure and facilities. The difference is the employees. How good are they at their job? How welcome do they make people feel? How professional is the service that we provide? That is what our guests remember. We have to treat our staff, our employees, as the most valuable investment that we have. And that's, I think, fundamentally important.
In an essence, a lot of people consider tourism and hospitality as a temporary job. How do we encourage them and keep them for a long term?
Well, I think learning from your peers is very important. Often we find peers are the most trusted source, perhaps more than ever before. Younger people listen to other young people, and social media allows that to happen. So we have to make sure that the stories of successful and fulfilling careers, and in any age bracket, in any demographic cohort, we tell those stories. I think that's fundamentally important. We have to start at schools. We have to start with the parents too. Often it's the parents who are somewhat reluctant to support their children who flag that they may want to go into a tourism or hospitality school. And the parents are almost disappointed sometimes, that they don't want to become engineers or doctors or lawyers, which is unfortunate. So we should encourage our children to follow their dream and follow the job where they can fulfill their desires and their aspirations. And tourism and hospitality has such a wide scope of opportunities, and most tourism jobs you can carry out just about anywhere in the world. So some of the skills you acquire in a tourism career, interpersonal skills, customer service, adaptable thinking, problem solving, Those are life skills that can guide you into not just many tourism careers, but many careers full stop.
Daniel, let's look a little bit into the future. What would you say to the industry about the opportunities that the Olympic Games present leading up to 2030?
Well, I'm very pleased that the community and certainly the Queensland government is very clear that the Olympics are not just about the 2 or 3 weeks of sporting events, but they are also about the 10 years that will lead us into it and the 10 and 20 and 30 years that follow. I mean, we have to see it like that. And it's obviously already evident that the mere fact that we will have those games here in 10 years have activated all kinds of avenues, opportunities with the focus of the world strongly on this city, on this state, on this country. You talked about Google before. We know that when the announcement was made that Brisbane would host the Olympics and Paralympics, Brisbane was the most searched term on Google the next day. And already there are plans afoot and activities are taking place of people coming over here to investigate what's possible, not just sporting related. There will be a lot of sporting visitation in the lead up, but also businesses learn more about the opportunities here, the development of the infrastructure, not just the bricks and mortar, but the technology, the transport infrastructure. All of that now is attracting enormous interest from the business community. Clearly, the tourism and hospitality industry, from airlines to accommodation, to professional services, to transport services, to attractions, will benefit from it. So, and the skills that as a staff member you acquire in the lead up to games like that is very good on your resume, needless to say. We have to see this as an opportunity to calibrate the path for the city, this state, this country. Where do we want to be? You know, given the changing consumer mindset, the changing technology, the advancing technology, changing priorities globally, how can we position ourselves so we'll live in a place in 10 years, we live in the place that we want to live in and a place that people want to visit. And I feel that tourism and hospitality is very much at the center of this, you know, because we are about hospitality, welcoming people. We have the oldest two cultures, living cultures in the world, the Torres Strait Island culture and the Aboriginal culture. And they too are all about hospitality. We now do acknowledgement to country, welcome to countries. That's about hospitality. So the idea of exchange, meeting, trade is 60,000 years old here in Australia. So we should be very confidently build on that and make the most of the opportunity.
It seems like a fantastic time for young people to join the hospitality and tourism industry for a long-term career. What do you say about this?
As you start your career in this industry, think not of, does this job today fulfill all my aspirations for the rest of my life? That's probably a long way to look at it. Look at it as an opportunity, a stepping stone to the next stepping stone, to build a portfolio of skills that you can take into the future. Every opportunity in the tourism and hospitality industry is a learning opportunity. And you will take away something for yourself from every job that you do. And see it as a career opportunity for the long term, absolutely. And look, I see many people further down the path, and many of them say that they drifted out of the industry perhaps, and they inevitably came back, because it is an industry where you can work very positively with people, where you can enrich your own life, and I don't mean just financially, but enrich your life and your life experience, and feel useful in many ways in the community as well.
Before we close, I just have a personal curiosity. What country inspires Daniel in the quality of hospitality and tourism, and why?
Yeah. Well, look, I think most cultures, every country has something to offer. You know, I will weasel my way out of this question a little bit. I grew up in Switzerland, as you know, and Switzerland also has a relatively long tradition of hospitality, and you know the Grand Tour, the Grand European Tour, generally included Switzerland in some way.
Yes.
So there is a bit of a tradition, as there is in many other European countries, a sort of a more formal and structured hospitality training. So I admire that, and I think there's some things we can learn and adapt in our more casual setting here in Australia. But look, hospitality, I'm very fortunate to have traveled to many countries, and some of the poorest countries of the world, you know, from Bangladesh to others, where I felt so welcomed by some people with few means, and it just demonstrated to me that hospitality is an attitude of the right people.
Hospitality is an attitude. The skills you build in hospitality is a life learning skills you can use everywhere. Hospitality industry can be at the forefront of contributing to the Sustainable Development Goals. This is just some of the things that we've learned from you today. Any other thing you would like to close off with?
Look, thank you very much. It's always interesting to be a little bit challenged and reflect a little bit on what we all do at any stage of your career. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Daniel. Thanks for your time.